Welcome to another wonderful edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I'm joined on this episode by author Jamie Jo Hoang. Jamie Jo, which
Yep.
would you prefer?
Jamie.
Jamie. Welcome and thank you so much for being here and chatting with me for a few minutes.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the podcast. I love talking to teachers and educators. Um, I'm really inspired by the work that educators do, in particular, just because I know it's so hard being a teacher, coming up with curriculum, and then also the work of adding all of these wonderful texts that come out every single year to their catalog and um, helping students enhance their learning by adding some depth through narrative. Um, it's really why I do this work, and I'm so grateful to be here.
Well, thank you so much. Your work is part of what makes this meaningful and joyful as a teacher, and I'm so glad to share about your work. And you were just at NCTE, I believe, as well.
I love NCTE. Prior to becoming an author, I did not know that NCTE existed. I really wish I had. I'm not in the like education space. I've taught classes, but mostly in like I taught in juvie, or I'll teach writing courses through like centers that just help adults get going with writing. I didn't really know that there was this huge conference of teachers. And the first time I went, it was extremely overwhelming. They're massive events, but every single person that you meet, whether you're standing in line, getting coffee, or just wandering the halls, stepping into random sessions, they're so passionate about their work and they're so driven and they're so they want to help other teachers help their students. And that interconnectedness of ideas is something I've never seen before. It's such an honor, honestly, to be invited and to be able to talk to educators and just to listen to how they educate. It's fascinating and wonderful, and it makes me really glad to be a part of this world.
Yeah. NCTE is such a huge conference, and I'm so glad that they also include authors, middle grade authors, young adult author. I mean, in any span, any age range, and comics and a variety of speakers. So glad that you are connected to that world as well. And I am curious, what was education part of your connection to the written word? What was the initial drive to be a writer?
My grandmother is illiterate. And when I was growing up, as like the sort of first gen Vietnamese American born in America. So my parents are first gen. They came here first. So I'm technically second gen. But my parents didn't speak really good English. And so growing up, I was really this sort of family translator. And I remember this one time in particular, I went to the Social Security office with my grandmother because she needed to renew her card or she needed a passport. And the guy had sort of slipped the passport back under the glass, the like plexiglass, and asked her to sign it. And she took the pen and her hand was shaking so bad because my grandmother had never really written before. And she wrote just the first letter of her name, the letter K. And I remember knowing at that time the power of words, the power of being able to read. And I know that this is like a bit of a cliche, but it rings so true for me is like when I was growing up, books allowed me. I didn't really get to go many places. My parents were working 18, 20 hours a day. And so books were like a portal for me into different worlds, different spaces, different ideas. And I really clung to it as a source of inspiration, but just it gave me a way out when I felt like I was sort of trapped, in my sort of small world. And so I think knowing that my grandmother came from a space of illiteracy and wanted so badly for us to not be like her, like she wanted us to go to school. Education was a priority always. And I think getting to America was one of the things that most Vietnamese people were aware of is like you get a free education and you're going to
Hmm.
milk that education for everything it's worth. You will learn everything you possibly can and like take that knowledge with you forever because she never had that. So I think for me, being able to tell our stories and include it in the world of literature, is extremely meaningful.
Yeah, yeah. Literacy is so powerful. Just thinking about Paulo Freire, whose work actually inspired the title of this podcast. I mean, it is power. It is that notion of unlocking, and words are so important.
Yeah, I think they help us understand the world um, in a way that you couldn't just on your own. And I
Hmm.
think it's the greatest bridge of empathy to any culture, to any society, to ideas. Um, and I think I just know like my grandmother passed away 2 years ago, but I feel like her knowing that her story lives on in the world, it really mattered to her. And so it matters to me too. I'm getting all emotional. Um, yeah, it's inspiring work, but I feel like it's necessary and I'm just really grateful that I have the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, yeah. I'll mention a couple of titles here. My mother, the Mermaid Chaser. My father, the Panda Killer. Blue Sun, Yellow Sky. We like the comma in the middle of the title. I like that trend. It's a very good trend. Uh,
Yeah.
what's it like to write for a younger audience?
Oh, teen readers are the best.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like they are because they're like a flower in bloom. You know, they're still opening, and because they're so open, their ability to like absorb information is is quite beautiful. The way that they take in stories and then are able to empathize and really, not all of our stories are relatable to everyone, but because teenagers have this like amazing capacity for empathy, I think it resonates with them and they don't need to have been to Vietnam or they don't need to have been on a journey across a boat to understand the difficulties and to come out the other end knowing that, you know, we as a collective human like society, we need to lean on each other and we need
Hmm.
to look at each other with care and, help out wherever we can. And I think when I look at the world, students are the most inspiring of everyone. They stand up when it's necessary. They're pushing the limits of ideology and they're questioning things. And I just love getting to connect with students in that way because I know that they are the driving force of what's like good in the world. And as long as we can keep that inspiration train going, the world is always going to be a better place because of their ideas and their empathy and the world that they're able to build because they are so like emotionally attuned.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. And you've already mentioned your grandmother and family, but I'm curious about that experience of reflecting on family life and family dynamics in your writing. What is that like?
You know, I think there are a lot of really hard topics in the books. There's a lot of tragedy that befall the characters, um, but at the root of all of it is love. Um, my family is complicated. They've suffered a lot, but they are bonded by a desire to grow and to push forward. And sometimes the way in which we push forward when we have experienced traumatic things is not the best, particularly if you don't have resources and you aren't able to um, really work through your feelings and the things that you've gone through. So it was really important to me to show the real dynamics, what happens, with children of war and how that generational trauma gets passed down, but also to highlight how we move forward, how we pass through this trauma, and get to a place of understanding and building bridges of peace and really connecting to what makes us who we are. Um, and I think at first I was really worried that my family reading the books, they would be like, why did you put all this in here? It doesn't make us look good. But actually, like all of my cousins who have reached out to me, they're my cousins' children who are teenagers reading these books, um, or even people my age who have found the books just because they're friends of friends. They've reached out to me and, expressed that the books have helped them look at their parents in a completely different way. And I
Mhm,
think
mhm,
as children of refugees, we don't often think about what our parents had to experience. And part of that is because we are trying so hard to move forward in life. We're trying so hard to, reach the accolades or, become the doctors, the lawyers, the educators, the professors, the professionals that our families really wanted for us. And we're not given the time or space to really reflect on how we got here. And so there is generally a disconnect between first gen Vietnamese Americans and second gen Vietnamese Americans, right? And I really wanted to bridge that gap because
mhm,
I think that the sacrifices our parents made are important. And the work that we do is different than the work that they did. So it's a privilege for me to be able to in this space of, not being um, amid a war right now. I do have the time and space and the privilege of being able to look at our history, analyze it, and really focus on how we move forward. I think having a kid myself, it's just about every generation elevating the next generation. So for me, I hope that my generation looks back at the past generation, not with like this sense of like begrudging, but a sense of awe and um, inspiration, like inspiration. I think that we should be inspired by the grit and the like hard work that our parents put into getting us to where we are, and then also keep moving forward with the change train, if you will. Like
mhm,
we don't
mhm,
just stop here. We have to keep going. Because there's a lot to work through and a lot to process. And we are doing that work. I look around at my generation and I think like, yeah, the teens of my generation are doing the work that I'm hoping the teens of the next generation will do, which is like my generation, I think we had to look at where we came from and try to figure out how to move forward. And I think what's so inspiring about the teens today is they get to take Vietnamese culture and show it to the world with pride.
mhm,
We now have Vietnamese food that's part of American culture. Vietnamese coffee is a big thing. Vietnamese coffee is in Whole Foods, of all places, right? So and Target and Costco. And I think just seeing our culture permeate the world in really positive ways is is seeing the work churn. And
mhm.
that to me is the greatest. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the way stories are connected, and over time they get connected. And one of the things that I appreciate about your work is how there are those kind of like across time stories and across spaces. So I'm curious about what that's like. Pulling back time. I imagine there's some research involved. I imagine that you're pulling some family story in there as well. Thinking of your grandmother, and so what is that process like for you?
When I started researching these books, well, I shouldn't say over the course of my life, I have spent time digging into the Vietnam War. I would look a little bit and then I would put it aside. I'd look a little bit, I'd put it aside. And I was just kind of gathering information. But one of the things that kept coming up in my research was I never saw civilian stories. I only ever saw stories from the top down. It was about the generals at the time who were making the decisions. It was about the governments and how they were built and who was in charge of, creating the North Vietnamese alliance and the South Vietnamese, right? I never saw, though, the civilian impact of the war. And my family was really poor in Vietnam, and they were really impacted by the war in I think a way that like most people don't see, which is that the war just happened around them and they just had to figure out what to do. Um, One of the major themes in my book that I like students to think about is the family has a family in both the South and the North. And so when the uncle, who's a North Vietnamese communist, comes back, um, there is this tension, right? And how did that happen is the first question. And the answer is quite simple. When um, the when at the Geneva Convention they drew the line at the 17th parallel, they just split the country in half, right? And my family that was living in the South became part of the South, and my family that was living in the North became part of the North. And for 20 years, they did not connect. And in fact, there was this growing sort of fear about, do we trust the family in the North, right? So when my communist uncle came back after the war to check on the family, there's this moment my dad describes where they all sat down to dinner. And if anybody has ever been to like a Vietnamese dinner party, there's like 20 plates set out and it's very communal. Everybody eats together. And there was food set out, but nobody touched the food out of fear that it was poisoned. Right. So you think about that moment, that like that fear of like, how do we sit across from each other after this horrific thing that has just destroyed our lives over, more than 2 decades? And how do we build that bridge back, right? And it's time. It's time and building that trust, one bite at a time, if you will, right? And I I like for students to think about that idea that like, when we look at war, it's generally like, one flag against another, one group of people against another. We never consider that it might be one family against another. And if you personalize that, it makes it so much harder to look at the enemy, to dehumanize the enemy, right? You have to look at the fact that like, oh, these are real people. That's my cousin, and my dad would tell me these stories all the time about how brothers would come across each other in war. And while they might not shoot each other, if your comrade shoots your brother, it feels the same, right? It's one side against the other. And that kind of brutal tearing apart of Vietnamese society, I think, was really painful. But what comes of that is knowing that those bridges can be rebuilt. Vietnamese Americans today, we go back to Vietnam and like, most of us looking for our heritage and trying to reconnect. But, there's also this sense of like hey, we're all Vietnamese, and like having pride in being Vietnamese is crucial, and it's important. It's an important part of our identity. So it's nice um, to be able to have these conversations, even though they're really difficult conversations, and to talk about, you know, the ways in which we connect back to each other and rebuild our human connection to each other. And I think that that's sort of the thing I really hope that readers take away from the books. Obviously, I'm not a fan of war in general. I think it tears people apart and it's really quite unnecessary. Um, and so I hope that when you read a story about war and you're able to immerse yourself into a family and the characters become your friends, you look at it just a little bit differently, you know? Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, very well said. And there's so many questions there to explore. No wonder you have these books out in the world to explore these questions, to center them in characters and family. And I'm sure there's more that we could say, but people should also go and check out the work as well, because of the conversations that books like this can open up.
Yeah, and reach out to me. I'd love to talk to students. I love to talk to readers. I think if you're not familiar with the history, there are a lot of questions, and
Mhm.
I think it's perfectly valid to ask them. Um, I think, with the internet and like the way that we like to be perceived these days, I think a lot of times asking questions seems like, oh, I don't know if I should ask that. But I hope that people will ask me questions, that they will come and say, like, hey, I don't really quite understand, like, how how did they split Vietnam? Like, how is it possible that one family could have family in the North and the South? And did you not have any communication? How did that work? And then how did you find each other after the war? Like, these are all things I think are really valid. I think even Vietnamese Americans, we don't really know like the mechanics of what happened during that war, but also the history of Vietnam is long. And so the American war in Vietnam is just a small part of that history. So for most of us who are really looking back to find our roots, you have to look at like, China ruled Vietnam for 2,000 years. Japan ruled Vietnam for a time. The French ruled Vietnam for 80 years. America was just the last. So there's this history of colonizing Vietnam, right? And I think that for us, even the expats, when we go back to Vietnam, I think there's value in understanding like how that happened and how we got to where it is today. And also in looking at how Vietnam is thriving as a country that is not colonized, that it has, been able to dictate things for itself. No government is perfect. There are things you can, you know, talk about that people dislike, of course, but um, from like 1995 to now, Vietnam has changed so much, and that's because they're entering the world market, and Vietnamese people are so capable, they're so intelligent, and they're so like they have so much grit. They will power through anything. And I love that about our people. And I love sharing that with people and getting people to see that Vietnam's not just a product of war. And even if you're going to find Vietnam in that context, you can also find the beauty in how we bloomed after the war and the beauty in the things we've built and the joy that we want to bring. And when we present food in restaurants, it's because we want you to taste our culture and we want you to be a part of it. So like welcome to the table in a way.
Love that. Yeah. What are the questions that you're exploring now? What's next on the creative pathway? And then you mentioned that you enjoy talking with teachers and students. So, how can people reach out, find out more, and see the work?
So currently I'm on a path of finding VietJoy. Um, these two books were really an exploration about like our history and how we got here. And right now I'm in a space where I really want to explore um, Vietnamese pride, Vietnamese joy, the things that we've built in America as Vietnamese Americans that I think are really inspiring. And I want to show young readers and also maybe even readers my age, my cohort of, Vietnamese people that like we're building really cool things here. And we are on we have a forward momentum that is really cool. And
Mhm.
I think most Vietnamese people don't look at themselves as cool. And I would love for Vietnamese people to like read our work and see the things we're doing and think like, actually, we are kind of cool. Like we are doing cool things. And I would like to share this with my friends. So I'm working on a book that sort of takes those pieces and hopefully highlights or sheds light on like the very joyous parts of being Vietnamese. Um, and then you can reach out to me. I have a website. It's www.heyjamie.com. And all of my information is there. The contact page will reach out to me directly. I'm mostly on Instagram at Hey Jamie Reads. I have done TikTok, but not really.
Same, same.
Um,
I've seen it. I've been on there a little bit, but yeah.
yeah, I think it's a different world. And I keep
Mhm.
telling my friends, I'm sort of waiting for the next version of, because I did Twitter and Instagram, and then when TikTok came around, I was just too tired. So I think whatever the next one is, I will be on that.
Nice, nice. I love that idea of VietJoy, and I hope I get to connect with you in person at the next NCTE or in the years to come. And certainly glad to talk anytime and connect. Anything that we've missed that you want to make sure to include before we close?
Um, I don't think so. I just want to say that I'm a big fan of the podcast. I love
Thank you, thank you.
the work that you do. I do hope I get to meet you in person also. Um, I have listened to so many other authors talk about their work, and I find it so inspiring. Um, yeah, I think the snippets that you tell are perfect, and I'm so excited and honored to be here. It's such a joy. So thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for saying yes, and thank you for sharing the work and the stories.